Hey everyone, it's Christopher Swan, and welcome to this week's episode of Living Your Journey. Each week, I get the amazing opportunity to chat with people that love what they do in life. They understand their passions. Maybe it's a career path or the social impact that they're making. It's kind of like they're following their North Star. They also know their story may change, but they understand that they're on their journey every day. This week, I talk with the amazing storyteller and performer Clinton Leupp, or known to the world as the celebrated drag icon, Miss Coco Peru. Miss Coco has been entertaining us with comedic and endearing monologues and stories for 25 years. In addition to the many original stage shows, she also has been seen in films like Trick, Girls Will Be Girls, and TV series like Will and Grace and Arrested Development. And most recently has found additional notoriety in her smart and clever YouTube and Vine videos. But Clinton has a story beyond Coco. In our conversation, we talk about following a dream of working in entertainment and creating his own unique path. We get into some terrific stories like starting Coco for the first time, challenges and highlights along the journey, career advice, and a lot more. I've been following Miss Coco for years, loving the shows and enjoying everything I see. It's also been wonderful to see Clinton live such an intentional life. And this was an amazing conversation. Okay, let's jump into it. Well, let me officially welcome you to the show. It's so terrific to have you. You know, I've enjoyed your work for years. Just obviously, you're hilarious, you're wonderful. But more importantly, I've loved hearing your voice in the LGBT community. You've made us laugh, you've made us think, and you've had us come together. So to me, I think this is super terrific.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be a part of the community that because there was a time when I was young where I didn't even know there was a community, and then I was sort of frightened of the community, and so to be a part of it and celebrate it and to have survived all these years in it is really spectacular.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to dive right in with, just thinking about your career has spanned for such a wonderful long, length of time, and you've done some really different things. I want to dive into why do you do what you do? Like, we almost refer to that as like, what's the why? Why be a storyteller? Why be a performer?
From when I was very little, wanted to be a performer. That was always the constant thing in my life. And then it was sort of devastating when I realized that who I was to my very core was not acceptable in my, not only in the real worlds, but even in the theater world. I went to college for theater. Well, even before that, would audition for the high school shows and never get cast. And if anything, I always got chorus. But I would make my friends that were in the theater group laugh, and they all thought I was terrific, but I never got cast, and it was because I was effeminate. And then I went away to college for theater, and it was sort of the same thing. They were always reminding me to butch up and to lose the Bronx accent, and that my S's were too hard. So on some level, it was very shaming. From when I was very young, and I sort of felt like my dreams were dashed. And then I sort of had this epiphany to create Coco. And it was very liberating for me. And I just knew that I had found my passion.
Tell me more about that passion too, and how that's connected to creating Coco. Was it around that character and what the character can bring to life? Because, within your shows, they're personal monologues, but they can be political, some activism, and it's all told with comedy. So how did having that epiphany to bring Coco to life, how did that bring a passion to life or follow it?
Well, there were a few things that were happening at that time in my life. And I was coming out I had a boyfriend for the first time late. And, considering how young people are coming out today. And he was leaving the country, and I was sort of devastated and knew that I had to create my own work if I was ever going to have a career. It was clear based on the auditions I had been on that I was never going to get hired unless I created my own work. So there was that need to want to perform and to be a performer. And then at the same time, I was dealing with wanting to be an activist in New York City because that was such a driving force in the city at that time. And these young people were, fighting for their lives. And I kind of got caught up in that energy. So I knew that my performance had to come from this activist point of view. And then at the same time, I had seen Charles Busch do a play, where, of course, he plays the female lead. And for the first time, I saw like drag, but in the theater. And that really excited me. And Julie Halston, who was his sidekick in the show, had this really thick Bronx accent. And I thought, here are two people. One is really effeminate, working off Broadway, and one has a really strong New York accent like me, working off Broadway. I don't have to be ashamed of this. I mean, so I started thinking about drag. And at the same time that happened, I was reading a book about Native American two-spirits and how they believed that there were people that had both male and female. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had an identity, like that's who I was. And I just decided that I was going to do drag and that I was going to be a modern day two-spirit, and I was going to tell my story. And I started writing a show. I called a club in New York City. I told the booking person that I was going to do a show there in 3 months. And I gave myself 3 months to write the show, figure out what I was going to look like in drag, go figure out how to buy garments and shoes. And it was crazy. But in 3 months, I did that.
Was that experience just, it must have been super exciting, but was it a little overwhelming? I mean,
it was just totally overwhelming. Yeah. But here's the thing. It was the first time in my life where something felt so overwhelming, but it didn't stop me. It was the excitement and the focus were bigger than my fears.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and that for me was such a powerful experience that to this day, I wish I still had more of that. But to this day, I am often, my first reaction to anything is usually fear. And I push myself to do it.
Is that like the fear of the unknown or fear of what's next?
And I think because I had been so bullied as a kid and every day I left my house, there was that potential of just being humiliated or being physically pushed and whatnot. So that fear is real to this day. And I can work my mind around that and say, well, I don't have anything to be afraid of anymore. But it's so a part of my DNA now that I have to figure out ways to work through it. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to create Coco as well, was because, and this is a little corny, but at that time, still to this day, I was just determined that once I came out to my parents, once I felt all that freedom, once I realized there was a community, I found a gay bookstore and was reading books and memoirs of gay people that came before me. And I realized, my God, I had a whole rich history here, a connection to something bigger than myself that I never knew existed. I wanted to get, this of course was before internet, but I wanted to give my voice to that so that kids would never have to go through what I went through. Because I realized what a waste of time and mental energy and all the anguish I put myself through was really for nothing, except that it probably made me a survivor and made me who I am today. But, there's been a price to pay for all that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that you thought of it that way. You also mentioned when you talked about creating that character, creating Coco, it makes me think about, it's funny, I've talked to a few actor friends of mine too, and they have this enormous stage fright about themselves. But when I heard somebody say the other day when they have to do a photo shoot for a film or whatever they're working on, that's one of the worst things they have to do because they have to be themselves. And they talk about but when I'm a character, I can get past the fear, and that's one of the things they have to do.
Well, I concur, and that's exactly what Coco did for me. But see, here's but it was bigger than just for acting. It affected every part of my life, because when you're in drag and you walk out into the world, there is absolutely no turning back. You have to be totally present and in the moment, and that's kind of where the freedom and the liberation and the excitement lives. So that's what drag taught me, was that once I walked out on that stage, there was no turning back. You just had to deliver. I'm also a perfectionist, so I really, at the time, worked on writing my shows, rehearsing them, because that's where I find my freedom as well, is in being well rehearsed and prepared. Yeah. I'm not one of those people that can just, over the years I've gotten better at improv, but that all depends on the situation as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm very much the same way. The more prepared I am, the more I have flexibility and freedom.
Right.
I think about this as you're going out there. I love that you just talked about, when you go out and drag, you have to really be present in the moment. It's interesting because there's this fear piece of this, but I would imagine you're also, in this moment, you're kind of vulnerable as well. Because you're sharing your personal stories, you're doing these pieces, but you're there. Is there truth to that vulnerability? And if so, is that also maybe even helping you in your career, or helping you become, or following that passion?
Yeah, I think vulnerability is something that's underrated, and it was one of the things that I wanted to be when I created Coco. And I've in the past I know that I've always been really celebrated, and the reviews have always been great. But there have been a couple of times where I've sort of felt like, I think they missed the point. And one of the things is that when there was one time where I heard some feedback that my show was schmaltzy, and I think they were probably a little bit more early on, because I was young and my writing wasn't as I've grown. But I think that a little bit of schmaltz is okay, and that vulnerability is okay, especially when it's balanced out with all the sort of self-deprecating that I do. And I've told some of my friends over the years that have had trouble finding a relationship. I tell them, you need to be more vulnerable. It's okay to be human and I remember my first date with my first boyfriend. I was so nervous of rejection, of being judged. I couldn't understand what he could possibly see in me. And on our first date, I just was like, I've got to be honest with you. I am so nervous right now. And I kind of just told him why I was nervous. And he was so relieved, because he was just as nervous. We all have our hang-ups, I guess. And I definitely feel like Coco allows me to express all of those hang-ups in a healthy way. It's cheaper than, well, not cheaper, but I feel like in many ways it's like group therapy, my shows. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think I went off on a tangent. I'm not sure I answered your question.
I think you did. I love all of that. It's interesting that that we even talked about this fear of the vulnerability too, because from somebody from the outside, when I watch your shows or see you perform, and I'm sure this goes for so many performers, that we wouldn't know that you're going through fear, and that it's really about you're probably being very intentional with being in the moment and being vulnerable. So for me, I think, I had a little aha. I was like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel all the time when I do things, maybe in a different way, but it's just like you said, it's being human. I love that. So I think that's wonderful to hear that you too experienced that.
Oh yeah, especially because what I'm telling are autobiographical stories. I think that's where a lot of my fear lays as well, is that if I'm rejected, it's not just a character that I'm playing where I can sort of put the blame on someone else. It's all on me. So I guess, and it's my personal story. So I think that's part of where the fear lies as well.
Yeah. As you started that and you had the epiphany to create Coco, and you've been doing this for quite a few years with a lot of live shows and other mediums as well. But did you find it even in the beginning maybe that it was difficult creating your own path? Because at that time, drag wasn't as mainstream at all like it is in the last 10, 15 years. So what was that like over that journey in the beginning? Difficulties or really standing out?
I realized early on, especially in New York City, that if you were going to stand out, you had to create something special, something different, something that would make you stand out from the others. That was sort of my intention of how I even looked as Coco, because back then, drag in New York City was a bit over the top. It was some of it was clownish. It was really big. And I decided, oh, okay, well, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm not even going to wear a lot of jewelry. My hair is going to not be that big. So there was an intention behind even Coco's look.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and at the time, I don't think there were any really drag queens that were doing storytelling. It's become something now that I've seen other drag queens do. But at that time, I remember people having this weird reaction to when I would try to explain to them what I did. And even to this day, if people aren't familiar with me and they see it, and they're trying to explain to their friends who aren't familiar with me what I do, they always feel like they have a hard time explaining it. But back then, I think it was even more so because drag queens lip synced in bars, which was great. I loved that, but that's not what I wanted to do. And then, of course, back then, like I said, there wasn't internet. So you had to rely on the newspapers and the gay, what we call rags,
Right.
To come and review you. So I was kind of coming up with all these ways to get people to come see my show. One of them was I would go out to other piano bars and get up and sing a song, which was terrifying for me. I remember literally my body shaking at first. Then, of course, I was accepted and I had a great time doing it. But when I first started, I would go to other piano bars to perform. I got a couple of club gigs through friends. I don't think any of those club people really came to see my show, but I went and did it. I walked around at night handing out postcards. I spray painted the sidewalks late at night.
I love that.
With a quote, we had a cutout, my friend and I, and it said, Miss Coco Peru, she knows. And people will walk around going, what the hell is this? Who is this person? What does she know? But it created like a buzz. And also I created a phony company, and I was producing this show. And no one knew that Clinton Leupp was Coco Peru, so I was signing it as Clinton Leupp and inviting newspapers and different theater companies and whoever I could get to come see my show, and I would offer them comps. And some of them came.
That's brilliant.
But it was exhausting. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do all of that nowadays because I was driving down from the Bronx almost every night, trying to find parking and driving in drag. Sometimes I even took the train through, like, at that time, really kind of neighborhoods you didn't, you had to be really careful, and it was crazy. But I was so driven to create that. And then I was very lucky because the newspapers did come and I got great reviews, and my show became kind of this cult thing to do, and word of mouth really is always the best thing, and I had great word of mouth.
Did you find that took much? Obviously, there was a ton of work involved, and I love that you spray painted the sidewalks late at night. That was awesome. But there's a lot of work in the beginning to do that, and you were so driven. Was that like that word of mouth? When did that really start? I mean, how long was the struggle really happening there for you? Because I bring this up because in a lot of the conversations I have, I like to set the reality straight. There's so many people that we see out in entertainment or in a career in an executive or whatever. And it just seems overnight that they've become successful. And that's a wonderful way to look at it. But I think the reality for so many of us that are, looking for that purpose or that passion is, hey, you have to put in the work. And so that's the kind of the context of my question is, was that like a matter of years that you were really kind of hustling to bring the people in?
No, but it was always a hustle.
Mm.
The people were coming, but it was a constant hustle.
Okay.
To get them in and to keep the buzz going and the word of mouth. And so I always felt like I was hustling,
mm-hmm.
but I did feel like lucky that at least the people were coming, and that there was this good word of mouth because I was talking about AIDS and being political and making fun of the church at the time. And it did have this sort of activist feel. So all these young people, as well as older gay guys, were coming to see my show. And then lesbians were coming. And at that time, the women and the men didn't mix so much
mm-hmm.
together. And I didn't ever really understand that. Some of my best friends at the time were women. So I was really pleased with the diversity of my audience as well in New York.
Yeah. I love to hear that. Well, kind of jumping forward just a little bit. So
I just want to say one other thing.
Please. Oh, please.
One of my concerns nowadays is that I do get a lot of emails from young people who ask me how to become famous. And they don't really understand that if you really want a long career or something that has value, it does take a lot of work. And I think with this dawning of reality TV, there is this celebration of people, reality TV stars, who don't really have much to offer, and that's so. And yet they become celebrities, and people will line up on streets to get into a nightclub where that person is being paid thousands of dollars to get up on stage and say, "Hey," and then get drunk and I only bring that up because that's what an owner of a club who hired some of these people told me, and that kind of startled me and made me feel rotten that someone was getting paid $10,000 literally just to show up and say hey to the crowd and then take photos. It amazed me. And
I'm glad you brought it up, though.
It was a housewife, by the way, that he was referring
Oh, was it?
to.
My partner would like to hear that. I find it interesting. I've talked to a couple actors lately in the recent shows, and we've talked a little bit about YouTubers versus kind of traditional Hollywood versus, this reality. And I think everybody kind of has said that, if you have talent and you work really hard, good for you. But if you're just there as somebody famous in marketing, then maybe that won't last, or, it's not a craft. And I kept hearing you do have to work hard at it no matter what you're doing, and you have to have a skill or a craft. So it sounds a little bit like kind of what you're talking about as well. Like, it takes real work. It's not just about being famous. You got to follow the thing that you really love to do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these YouTubers that a lot of them do have a craft, and a lot of them are really crafty at marketing. So and I'm friends with some of them, and I think it's amazing. But I think that there's this sort of, I don't know, that people are lonely or something, so they watch these, because I've watched some of the YouTubers that I don't think have any talent except that they're out there, and people are wanting a friend, basically, or wanting to feel connected to something larger than themselves, So, I mean, on some level, I guess it all has value. It just depends on what really rings true to you.
Entirely true. And and it's nothing against anybody that wants to go out and try something, to do something. Maybe that'll shift. I read an article the other day about one of the biggest YouTubers. He has started his own business. And he said, well, because I know this is going to burn out after a while. You can only watch my vlog for so long. And I thought what was beautiful about that, there was nothing wrong with what I was doing, and maybe it brought value somewhere else. But he really wanted to work on that craft and do something different. So I think it just comes down to, like you were saying, it's a lot of hard work, and, go after what you want.
Well, I think a perfect example is Tyler Oakley.
Oh, yeah.
Who I just really, I've gotten a kick out of him. I think he's cute. I think what he does is great. And like, I have no problem celebrating him. And honestly, I mean, he's responsible for whatever attention I've had gotten on YouTube, because he introduced me to a whole new group of fans.
Mm-hmm.
So there is value there. But I mean, maybe I'm talking about the Kardashians. Like, I don't quite get that kind of celebration.
Oh, I love that you just said that. That is my reference for things I don't watch. That's how I'm like, it's the Kardashian stuff that I don't watch.
And I don't even begrudge people watching it as like some sort of brain-numbing entertainment.
Sure.
What bothers me is that they think that there's a lot of people out there, and especially younger people, who think that is something to celebrate. Like, I grew up celebrating B. Arthur and people who worked for years on a craft and had something that, well, they had such value to me, a lot of those people that I grew up watching. And nowadays I wonder, the young people, what they're celebrating and why they're celebrating a show like the Kardashians, and why that is enough for them. See, because if I watch an episode of the Kardashians, I've never watched one, but like, who knows? I could be somewhat mildly entertained and feel voyeuristic and get off on some level, but I wouldn't line up, and I certainly wouldn't be a club owner willing to pay $10,000 for them to show up. $10,000. So that's my point. I'm kind of getting off on a thing, but that's where I draw the line.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And actually, it's a perfect segue, because I was curious about, you had mentioned it earlier too, about YouTube. The last few years, I really kind of noticed this trend in the last few years, that you've really embraced social media and YouTube in a lot more, in a kind of a little bit different way, with your, like, kind of the ultra famous going to Kmart and other adventures that you've done. Has that kind of shifted or altered kind of your focus in how maybe the projects you're doing or the type of performance that you want to present?
No. I still feel like my heart is in my theater shows. But the great thing is that those silly YouTube videos, at first I sort of felt guilty that people were like, I love you. And I'm like, oh, what have you seen? And they're like, your YouTube video. And I'm like, oh, because that's not what I really do. But
yeah,
the way I've worked my head around it is that most of the people watching those YouTube videos were younger people. And a lot of them were straight girls. And I think what they whether they thought about this or not, they liked my no-nonsense attitude. And I think they liked that I'm in full drag, in stores clearly where I don't belong, in the daytime, and I don't care what anybody thinks. And when you're a teenage girl and you're judged constantly by your peers and even by yourself based on what you're seeing in the media, I think that they're responding to the fact that, look, she doesn't care what anybody thinks of her. And they kind of like that, and also they ask if they can. I think kids want boundaries and that kind of no-nonsense parent, really. And so a lot of them write to me asking for advice now.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, so I've learned to wrap my head around those videos by thinking like, well, they really do have value to people.
They do. And they may also show them to, like you said, it's a new audience, but it's also maybe people that aren't in the cities that you have performed. And it's an entry point into seeing what you really are about.
Right. I haven't made one in a long time. I should.
Yeah, it has been a while. Yeah, I follow those as well. I will say I've seen you perform probably a good 5, 6 times. So I knew that first.
Thank you, Christopher.
My pleasure. So, from all your different shows to the movies that you've been in to, you've become this celebrated icon and really an influencer, or at least an influencer for many of us in the LGBT community. So to me, I can look at this and I think your career's been tremendous. What do you see when you reflect on your journey so far?
And that's so funny because I've even talked to like really quite famous people about this. And, we all are constantly striving for more.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I'll think, oh, I haven't done this, or, I wish I had the opportunity, or I wish I was doing more of this. But I always stop myself and think, okay, when I was that kid, if you had told me what I would be doing in the future and the people I would be meeting, like there's absolutely no way I would have ever believed that. So then I just kind of try to live in that place of like, if I wouldn't have imagined any of that being possible, well, that just, and this is part of my new show, that just means that there are still these possibilities out there that I can't even imagine. And I'm just going to stay really open to them and welcome them in. And at the end of the day, like I just filmed the pilot for Conversations with Coco. And I'm excited about it, and I want it to, of course, move forward, but keep reminding myself that if that doesn't go forward, I still have a really great life. Like I'm always trying to count my blessings. That's what keeps me sane. And there's been times in my life where I've gotten like really depressed or feeling like I'm struggling, or I don't know, things just aren't going the way I had hoped they would go. And my husband will stop me and say, why did you create Coco? Like, get back to the reality of why you created Coco. And then as soon as I do that, I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of refocuses me. That it's not about fame. It's not about trying to make a lot of money. It's not about this or that, or it's, I have to stay focused.
With that focus, are there specific goals now that you're aiming for? You've done so much, but I think as we get further in our career and the older that we get, we sometimes come up with different, either it's goals, and I don't want to say goals for success, because success is a funny word to me. It can, success in life is actually how I look at it versus just career. But I love that you just stay open, like, because you can't imagine what maybe something new will come along that you not thought of. But are there goals or things that you are still striving for, things that you're like, I would love to have that opportunity?
I joke that, my goal is to pay off my mortgage and have enough for retirement. And I say that that's a joke, but there's truth in that, as retirement age gets closer.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all the things that I'm thinking about now and wondering, how am I going to survive in a few years? And I'm lucky I have a partner as well that guides me along with that stuff. And he's actually not that I don't contribute, we both contribute, but I'm more in the present. He does think about how to prepare for the future. But those are the things I'm thinking about now. And, but yes, I'd love for Conversations with Coco to happen and to be able to, stay here in LA more and be at home more. The traveling and the lugging the suitcases is getting a bit exhausting for me as I get older. And, having to do a sound check and teach the show to each new person in each new city is exhausting. But years ago, I was friendly with Liza Minnelli, and she had invited me to something, and I had said to her, God, I just wish I had everything you had. Meaning I saw someone that took care of her costumes, someone who took care of her schedule, someone that did her sound, it's just, there was someone for, and she didn't. It just seemed so easy, you know. And I had said to her, I hope someday I have everything that you have. And she said something that I worked into a show, but it's still something I always think about. She said, just remember, darling, even when you get to my level, that just means there's another whole level of bullshit you have to deal with.
So true. It's so true.
It's so true. So I keep that in mind. And I have a friend that is very, very successful and very, very wealthy. And she said to me, with all the money comes another whole level of things to worry about constantly. Mm-hmm. So I realized that sometimes what we think as success isn't what brings happiness. It's the working, it's the creating that brings it. And I want to keep being able to create and make enough money where I can keep a nice lifestyle. I don't really need a lot of extravagance. I just want to feel safe. For years I always worried that I'd be homeless. And that fear, again, even from when I was a kid, I was obsessed with homeless people. Because we always had a few in my neighborhood. And I think that fear still is somewhere inside of me.
Sounds like almost a driver, though, to keep that safety, and now even further into the retirement. And
yeah. And I watched my parents struggle, and that is a part of it. And my parents made me go to work when I was like 10 or 11, on the weekends, and then during summer I worked. And I hated it. But it was like they didn't care that I hated it. It was like, you need to go make money. You need to have goals. You need to have a job. And so I had to do it.
Interesting, though, is I bet that blend right into, it just makes me think about you in New York, kind of really hustling, making your show happen. You were so determined. I wonder if some of that influenced you in your determination, or like you have to work at it.
It was, yeah. And I have to tell you, I do think there was a big driving force was fear. Mm-hmm. And my boyfriend had left, and I was devastated, and I had to keep my mind busy. So that was part of it too, was that like I couldn't, I just had to keep busy. Otherwise all the fears would take over. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, and I was going to bring this up as well, but the newest version of Conversations with Coco, the TV pilot that you just filmed, which I'm so excited that you did it. I played along and supported some of that your Kickstarter too. So I'm so excited that you are going that route as well. But for the folks that don't know, could you maybe give us a little description of what you had just created this last month?
Yeah, it's just a one-on-one with me and a celebrity, someone that I admire and want to celebrate. And we sit down side by side and talk about their life and their career, sort of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And a big part of what I want to do with this show is celebrate the craft. I want young people to be witness to some of these people that I've admired, and I'm open to now celebrating even younger people, but people who have a craft and who work hard at that craft and their journey, as well as and then we show clips and whatnot. So and it come from that sort of Coco point of view too, where we can laugh and silly together and be best friends, and part of the proceeds will continue to go to the center and the homeless youth program. So there has to be that element of activism and giving back to the community as well.
Absolutely. And the one that you just filmed too was if I remember correctly, you're doing this as a pilot then to shop it around to move it from, because previously it was in person at the center in Los Angeles, and now the idea is to take it from there and to shop it into a TV network of some sort. Is that true?
That's correct. So we filmed one with Lily Tomlin with the audience and a pretty set, and now they'll turn around and try and sell that as an idea where where this could be something where I sit down once a week, who knows how often, with someone.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. Well, I hope that happens.
I do too. I hope it happens too. I think it could be something different. And there won't be any, also I feel like a lot of the talk shows nowadays, they're very silly and whatnot, and that's cute. But I don't know. I prefer something a little bit more intimate.
Mm-hmm. Something with, I think, some depth and value. That's kind of what I heard,
And the thing that people don't expect is they don't expect that from a drag queen.
Absolutely.
So I think there's the twist, and that's been my twist my whole career, is that people come see my show and go, oh my God, I didn't expect that from a drag show. So I hope some of that translates into conversations with Coco, that people fall in love with Coco, and they're not expecting, they're falling in love with her, but not for the reasons they would expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I know that's one of your newest, you have a show coming up as well, and the pilot is one of your newest endeavors. I was just thinking through, and I was just personally going through different shows I've seen of yours and just the different work you've done. What are some of your highlights for, over your career or just over life? I know you travel quite a bit as well, even beyond just for work. You and your husband travel. What are some wonderful highlights that you've had over the last few years?
Oh my gosh, I've had so many. That sounds horrible to say. I've had so many highlights. Where do I even begin?
I actually think that's actually a wonderful way to look at it, though.
But, I got married in Spain in 2000. Oh, God, I always get confused. I think it was 2006. And, yes, it was 2006. And, marriage didn't even enter my mind, except when I was really little, and I would fantasize when I was in the second grade about a boy that was in the fourth grade, that we were going to get married. And then once I found out that was never going to happen, I just sort of gave up that dream. It just never occurred to me that I would be able to marry someone one day.
Yeah.
And in fact, my boyfriend that moved back to Peru, had to move back to Peru. We were going through problems anyway, and we probably would have parted ways for sure. But the fact that keeping him in the country wasn't an option to us always bothered me. So definitely getting married to my husband in Spain was an amazing moment. I've gotten to meet so many people that I've admired, and so B. Arthur was one of those people. And when I did my conversation with her, I had to return some of her awards that we used as a prop. Mm-hmm. So I had like her Tony Award and everything, and her Emmys in the back of my car in a cardboard box.
Sheesh.
And I remember at one point the car in front of me stopped short, and I had to step on my brake, and her awards went clattering all over the floor. And I thought, oh my God, did they? I was so. I couldn't wait to get them out of my car and get them back to her. But when I got to her house, she was terrified to do this conversation. She didn't really want to do it. And when she opened the door, she was so happy, and she said, I think it went really well last night. And I said, it was great. And she goes, you know what this means? We really are bosom buddies. And I thought, B. Arthur, who I had been obsessed with I was like 2 years old when I discovered B. Arthur. That for me was huge. So that was a highlight. Flying in a helicopter with Liza Minnelli, just her and I, was so over New York City, looking down at the city. It was so surreal, but another highlight. There's just been so many moments like that where I pinched myself.
Yeah, those are wonderful moments too. I mean, I love the story with B. That's why. And especially, I can absolutely imagine the awards in the car, and I would have the same feeling. Oh, that's wonderful.
And I will say, Trick and having the opportunity to make that movie really changed my life. So that was another highlight.
Yeah, I would imagine that's true too, because I know that has to be something that people bring up to you probably still to this day.
Yeah, and I love it. And I remember watching my first gay movie in my basement, and I had gone up to our local, I grew up in a small neighborhood in the Bronx, and I had gone to the video store, and I was so nervous renting a gay movie because I knew people already thought I was gay. I wasn't out. Oh, and I was shaking bringing that movie up to the counter, and I rented it, but I remember thinking, like, someday I hope I'm in a gay movie.
Really?
Yeah. And I remember then being at Sundance watching Trick when it was over, just going, oh my God, I'm in a gay movie.
Oh, that's so nice. It's just, it probably even, like, did it really feel like it came to fruition, or it was just almost overwhelming, kind of this, aha, look at where I'm at now?
Yeah, I didn't think about when I was making a gay movie. I didn't think about that moment when I was younger and wanting to be in a gay movie. And we tried to get Trick made for like 5 years before it got made. So we did all these readings, and I wasn't even a part of Trick when it first was written. But anyway, it wasn't until I saw it at Sundance and saw my name come up at the end with my little picture that I realized, oh my God, I fulfilled one of my dreams. I'm in a gay movie. So It was that aha moment.
Wow. That must have been kind of, I would imagine too, not just an aha moment of like, hey, I fulfilled this, but almost like a turning point. Like that kind of stuff, I imagine, has to help us, with a little bit of confidence, even when there is fear. But look, I really did do that. I can do more.
Yeah, and I had a huge reaction. Like the audience's reaction was so huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember filming it that day and going home and crying because I thought I was terrible and I had blown my one chance to be in a movie. And then to hear that reaction. And then the first gay audience I saw it with was in San Francisco. And again, that was just tremendous reaction, and at the Castro Theater. Sure. And then there was like an after party, and I walked into the after party by myself and was immediately confronted with people who wanted to say hello and meet me. And I never moved from that spot the whole party. I never got a drink. I never got an hors d'oeuvre. I just stood there and received people. And that was so amazing to me that people wanted to meet me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved out here and was doing my show out here, and I went to the Halloween parade, and I was walking around as Coco, and people were coming up to me thinking that I was someone else dressing up as Coco. They didn't believe they were meeting the real Coco. When I tried to convince them that I was the real Coco, they either didn't believe me or they were really super excited. And I remember thinking, I can't believe people are so excited to meet me. It was wild.
How long did it take for that to, I mean, it still must be wonderful when people, and fans come up, but, that surreal moment, did it, I think that comes with the newness. Did that last for quite a long time, or did you finally get comfortable on that sort of newer celebrity status?
Well, I don't feel like a celebrity, but I love it. I love when I feel appreciated. Who wouldn't?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember another actor sort of said that people were still coming up to him commenting on Trick all these years later, and he said something to me like, oh, like I told them I've moved on, let it go, or something like that. And I said to him, oh no, you can't do that. I said that meant something to that person, and they want to express that to you, and honestly, that might be the last movie you ever make. You should totally celebrate it, and so that's kind of the way I still feel about everything I do.
I especially like that point of that meant something to that person. Because it's not just about, I think we get in our own career, our own, work, whatever we're doing, focused on that creation, that development, like you talked about. That's the fun part. But that slice in time is meaningful.
And I'm like I said, I don't feel like a celebrity. So when people are excited to meet me, I know this sounds corny, but I am so flattered. And something happened it was in May. I was doing my show in Orlando, and afterwards I was walking through the crowd, and this guy stopped me, and he started commenting on this, this dress that I was doing. That wasn't my costume. It was like an after show dress I just threw on. Mm-hmm. And he's looking at me, and he's saying something about there will be no brisket, or I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And I'm looking at him, and I thought he was making fun of me. And I kind of was like, okay. And then finally, I walked away from him, and he turned around. He says, "I am a big fan," or something. And it wasn't until a few hours later I realized he was quoting one of my YouTube videos. And that's the dress I was wearing in the YouTube video. And I still feel rotten. I blew this guy off because I really didn't know what he was talking about. And I thought he was making fun of me. He was doing the accent, and I thought he was saying that what I was wearing made me look like an old zombie. I didn't get it. And but I in my mind, I still think about that guy, and I want to make it right with him. So that's really how much I value people's support. The thought that guy is out there feeling like Coco was such a bitch bothers me so much. Anyway.
But that's meaningful that hold on to that. Well, I think this is perfect because this segues kind of into we usually like to wrap up with a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests, which are what advice would you give to somebody who wants to maybe either follow kind of in your path, maybe it's a performer or following a dream, knowing that there's obstacles in the way? Is there something you would share with them and say, think about this or do this?
Well, I would say that if they have any fears, just sort of work through them, figure out what you do well and really just focus on that. And show up on time is something I always tell these young kids. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I learned, one of the things my parents taught me, but then it was reinforced in college, was to respect the people you're working with. And sometimes I see people be very dismissive to other people that they think are a bit lower than them, and I've always treated the technicians that I'm working with, really, and everyone, bartenders, whoever it is, I try to introduce myself and really respect them, because I know that they're supporting me and my show, whether it's because they're doing the lighting, the sound, serving a cocktail quietly, that all matters to me and to my show. So I really make an effort to respect everyone. And if I didn't, my mother would smack me anyway.
Well, so that's good advice.
Yeah, I just feel like it's just the right thing to do anyway.
It is, and I think you're right. And I love that your connection, not only are you respecting people, but you even connected it to, they're all there really helping you to the, serving the drink quietly. That's great advice. Reflecting back a little bit for yourself, looking back at your journey and kind of how you started, if you could change anything, would you do anything differently in your journey?
Yeah, I wouldn't have wasted so much time. I wasted a lot of time at different chunks of my life. And there were moments where I did let fear stop me, and I felt kind of frozen. I let the depression take over in those moments. And I realize now that I'm older how valuable time is. And I was always told that as a young person, but when you're in the throes of feeling down or not creative, it's hard to sit down in front of a computer and start writing when you're not feeling particularly creative. But I would encourage people to sit down and just start, and when I did go through a depression, the way I broke out of it was I pretended to be happy, and I went out and bought flowers, and I smiled at people and kind of tricked my brain. And one day I realized, oh my God, I feel happy. Um, so, but I would just say don't waste a lot of time.
Yeah, that's smart. I love that you just said you kind of tricked your mind. I'm a believer in that too. I kind of fake my way into a feeling. If I'm not feeling creative, go do something creative to make me feel that way.
Yeah, that's sort of what I've had to do in my life. Because I realized too that my therapist once told me, and it kind of shocked me that he said it, but he basically said that I've never known what it feels like to be normal. And that I've always been depressed from early on. So I grew up not knowing what normal feels like. And I'm not saying I'm against taking drugs to that, but at the same time, he always told me that I didn't need to take any kind of meds for it, because I always seemed to have this survival instinct that I think my parents taught me to sort of work through stuff and keep moving forward. So, but I think that is something I've always had to struggle with. So I would say to people, if you're struggling with that, certainly get help, but don't let that struggle stop you.
Yeah.
And another thing, like everything that I was scared of, and being effeminate and drag terrified me. It turned out to be the key to my success. So that's another thing I would say to people. If something's really terrifying you, like address it. Kind of celebrate it, embrace it, and see where it takes you.
I love how that connects to earlier. You also said, find out what you're really good at. And I think there's probably that fear piece there. Yeah, find out what you're so afraid of, and maybe that's part of your story.
Yeah.
That's so smart. I didn't think of it that way. Well, what
are you afraid of?
You know what's funny? Interesting for me.
Everything.
I have to say, when you said it too, I was like, oh, I actually really contemplated. I thought, what was I afraid of? It was being vulnerable, putting yourself out there, even just for myself. So, my past story is I was in a much more standard career in communications and marketing. I still do some of that as well. But then I said I just wanted to start my own thing, and I really wanted to focus on helping spread, stories around and entertain and become a storyteller, because I love it. But I was afraid of trying it, and I'm not a spring chicken, so it's taken me a while to do it. So, anyways, that resonated for me when you said it. I thought, oh, I never thought of it that way.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure that everybody probably knows where to find you online. There's multiple places. We've talked about YouTube and whatnot, but what's the best place, do you think, to send people to follow along and see your next shows and your journey?
I always encourage people to join my email list at misscocoperu.com, because they will definitely get an email of the different cities I'll be appearing in. And I rarely send out emails, so it's not like you're going to get bombarded with, a lot of junk mail from me. But because often, I'll post stuff on Facebook, and then people will write to me a week after my show's been into their city saying, when are you coming to, Ohio? And it's like, girl, I was just there. And, they're so disappointed that they've missed me. So I would say, if you really want to see a show, you should probably join my email list at cocoperu.com.
Great. We'll link to that in the show notes and also on the website. And you're absolutely right. Facebook, it's a little hidden sometimes to find those updates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, we'll definitely do that. Well, this has been a terrific conversation and such a treat for me. Like I've told you earlier, I've been a fan for such a long time, and it's been so nice to actually talk about kind of how you started this off in a really different, unique way. Then, your shows are so much fun, but this has been so fun and intimate. Thank you for sharing with us.
Well, thank you for, inviting me to be on your program. And, I wish you the best success with it. I think storytelling is a lost art, and we need storytelling. It's what makes us feel human and connects us.
I agree. And I think it also is what helps us inspire us to follow our own dreams or passions. And we get lost a little bit in that every day.
Oh yeah, I get lost quite often.
Now, over to you. Any thoughts or questions you'd like to share? Seriously, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me or the guest? We'll answer them and even get the guest to help us. So send us a message, use our Facebook page and email us there, or post a comment or question on the page, or tweet us at accidentalinfo using hashtag #livingyourjourney. You can find out more about all the guests, links to their sites and social channels, and even bonus content all at accidentalinformation.com. Now, a couple favors. Go subscribe to the show and you'll be the first to get the download before everyone else. Also, take just a couple moments and head over to the show in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a quick review. Quick, easy, and I would love it. This totally supports us and it helps me bring in interesting guests each week and keeps the show going. Also, I love to read them and see what you guys are really thinking. Thanks for joining the conversation, and remember, Living Your Journey is available every Tuesday. Until next week.